got a lot of information, so I'm going to talk quite fast. And I have to stand here. I don't have a clicker. I've got it forward using this, so if you can't see the screen, what else can I say? Some of these slides were put together by Dr. Gary Graham out of Ohio State. And you'll probably notice the more professional looking ones. If you can find the maple syrup producer's manual, they're out of print, but if you can find one, that's like the Bible for how to make maple syrup. There will be another edition coming out within about a year, but if you can ever find one, grab one. This is the area that maple syrup is being produced, and I'm from Merrill, Wisconsin. I sell equipment and package syrup. I used to produce syrup. But we're getting, the reason I mention it is we're getting inquiries from people from all over the maple region. Just last week I had a lady from Virginia contact me because she was doing an open house for a school. She makes maple syrup and she wanted some of our association coloring books to give as gifts. So it's kind of interesting to talk to these people and to realize they make syrup way down there in Virginia. Identifying maple is really tough. You know, here's a couple of photos to help you. First one's springtime when the leaves are not on. It's hard to do it. So you look at the bark. There's sugar maple, black maple, red maple, silver maple. I just learned Iron County Extension has a website and they've done some really good photos on how to identify. So if you have any questions, look that up. Sap flow is very complex. You can move that flow with tubing. And temperatures are important. I don't really have time to read all this, but you get the gist. Moves up the tree, it moves down the tree. People used to think it was only going in one direction. Not true. It's going both directions. When should I tap? You want the temperature above 32 and below 32, so you have the fluctuation. But for season to start, you need a pretty good fluctuation. You need a few days where it's up there, probably in the 40s. Whereas later in the season, it just has to get above 32 and it'll run. So when should I tap? Well, before that happens, obviously. But if you're tapping 50 trees, you can do it in a day, not a big deal. If you're tapping 5,000, 2,500, whatever, you need a little more time. Today, there's pretty good forecasts that will tell you what the long term is. But it still comes down to gut reaction. What do you think is going to happen so you're ready before the sap starts to run? You have a tight tubing system, you can tap early, no harm done. If you have an open system, which I mean buckets or sacks, you have to tap right at season because that tree starts to heal up with that air getting through the tap hole. So there it's really critical of picking the right time.
So the season more south starts earlier, does it in theory end earlier as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the lady in Virginia I just referenced, they normally start the end of January and they're done by the end of February.
Wow, okay. So it's relatively the same length of a season, depending on weather and fluctuations.
According to what she had to say, and that's what I've heard from others as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the time doesn't vary that much. Okay, so when and how to tap. One of the most important things is tapping your tree properly. So you want healthy wood. You want the correct number of tap holes per tree. Typically, it's 10 inches you can tap, although many of us are tapping 9 inches, occasionally 8 inches diameter. in my Sugarbush, once they reach 18 inches in diameter with a good crown, we'll put 2 on. But we don't ever do more. So you locate the tap holes properly. You want to make sure that you're not tapping into dead wood or stained wood. Tapping technique is important. Light upward slope and very, I'll talk about this later, a sharp tapping bit. Oh, right there. I can talk about it. You want the hole to be round, not oval. So you need a sharp bit, preferably made from wood, not from metal, and a little bit of a upslope. It's a poor idea. If you got a little bit of shavings in there, don't blow in it to get those out. You're contaminating the hole. Hopefully your drill brings all the shavings out. If it doesn't, maybe a stick from the forest, not your breath. Okay, so this is what I've already talked about. Use a proper spout. Use a clean spout. No corrosion on your spout if it's metal. Minimize handling because hands have bacteria on them. You put that on your spout, pound it, tap it, pound it into the tree, transferring that bacteria, you'll be able to faster stop running. And then see carefully. What I mean is don't pound on it. Tap it in. And when it feels and sounds like it's in snugly, stop. Don't give it one more. That's when you split the bark and stop it. So also remember to remove the taps after season. Don't wait until next year. The tree has to get green. So as I want a round hole, not an oval hole, leaf gauge. So the depth here it says 2 inches deep. The latest research came out of Proctor, and they're saying 1 3/4 inches up to 2 inches, and that's beneath the bark. So you have to use your judgment because the bark on a maple tree varies from almost none on those young ones to really thick on an older one. So there are some tricks, and a lot of people employ these. Put something over your drill so you can't go too deep, or paint it. But again, you have to be aware that the bark thickness varies, and that sometimes creates an issue.
Yeah, I got a question.
Go ahead.
So, I was gonna put a jig on my drill for a 2-inch depth.
Yep.
See if the bark is real thick,
Then you don't get a very deep hole.
okay.
So, judge. All I can say is if you want to do that, judge your trees. If you have a lot of old ones, then compensate for that. And be real careful on the young ones.
So when you say 1 3/4, that means on a tree that does not have, because you're still drilling through that bark, even if it's a younger tree.
Right.
So 1 3/4, you consider that?
Well, you want to set it a little deeper because you always have some bark.
Okay, so 2 inches might be reasonable.
Because you'll be 1 3/4 inside. Okay, difference between a sharp bit and a dull bit. When you look at the holes, you'll see it. So if you're tapping 5 trees, you'll probably go to the hardware store and buy a 5/16 inch drill bit. They're made from metal. Be very careful to drill that hole. Eventually buy a decent from a vendor out there tapping bit. You'll spend $14, $15, but it'll be made for tapping wood, and you'll get a much nicer tool. Over the years, you want to develop a pattern in your tapping. Suggested is 4 to 6 inches from the old hole, and also vary the height. If if you go straight around the tree, pretty soon you come back around in a few years and you're going in the same area and you're getting dead wood. The tree isn't trying to grow over it, but you're getting a lot of dead wood there and you're weakening the tree. So also vary your height. Another example of the same thing. Different ways to tap a tree. The first one I call the Armstrong Method. My grandfather used to tap trees that way. My dad did when he was younger, but we gave that up as soon as we could. But most people today are just using rechargeable drill because they have really good batteries. And then when you have a sharp bit, it also won't eat up as much as your battery reserve. So the two go hand in hand. Drill it properly. These things we've all talked about. Just reviewing. If you hit brown wood, stop, move. Brown wood will either give you no sap or yellow sap, and it'll contaminate your whole batch. If your whole or the sap is leaking around the tap, try to reseed it. Reaming usually doesn't work, or you can always drill another one. It's not good for your tree. But what you should notice from this photo is the wet bark around that bucket and down to the root. That's a spot that hasn't been seeded properly. So the sap's leaking instead of going where you want it. Different sizes and styles of spouts. Today, most of us are using 5/16. I had one producer tell me he switched last year. He couldn't believe it actually increased his production. And I found that some years ago too. I'm not sure why. My one theory I have is there's less air getting to the hole itself, so the tree isn't healing up as quickly. These are tubing spouts, 5/16, 1964s. They do the same thing, and again, they're not the 7/16s. Talked about guidelines. Collecting, you can use buckets. Make sure they're food grade. Make sure they're clean. And even food grade used buckets, be very, very careful because people say, well, I cleaned them out, they're fine, but there's still probably residue embedded in the plastic and often no flavor is certain. Because sap really picks that stuff up. No corrosion, no lead, cover it, gather it frequently. Ice you can leave in early. I always threw it away because ice is water. Sap has more sugar if you throw the ice away. And clean your gathering buckets and your tanks regularly. However you want to define that. More is better. Buckets and bags are most common for hobbyists. And that's even a blind bag. A lot of people are using those. Typically, they're not as strong as a regular sap sack, but they're used in the industry a lot today. Well, hopefully not. If the buckets are clean and corrosion free, and your bags are clean, it should be identical. It's only if there's some contamination somewhere. A little bit about tubing. It saves time during season, and that's when things are critical. Labor is shorter for all of us, unless you've got a family of hogs. So tubing saves time during season. May not save time totally, because it takes a long time to install it, and there's always maintenance. You can't just install it and walk away. You have to maintain it. You have to plan in advance, find your lowest spot where you're going to put your gathering tank, maybe pumps, and then walk it out, visioning where the main lines would be. So forth. Remember STD, straight, tight, and down. So what about storage? Depends, start off, how many trees, 4 taps, your average sugar content, how long your run is. A lot of hobby producers are what I call weekend warriors. They gather sap into the tank using tubing or whatever all week, and they can only cook on weekends because that's their only free time. So you have to allow for that when planning your storage. It's not necessarily a good idea to do that, but if you have no options, that's what you do. And from there, it's how big is your cooker and how hot are your fire. Brix is a sugar measurement. Maple syrup is syrup at 66.5 to 67 bricks. But if you're using the Bonnet scale, which is easier to read, that's 32. That's when it's done. That is legal. You need to be right spot on when you're selling your product.
Hey, can you go back to that one? That last slide, I just want to ask a question. So,
Sure.
are your hydrometers here?
Yep.
Yep. Fine.
Yep. One's a cold test, one's the hot test.
Okay, so this is a hot right here.
No, it's the other way around. Hot's on top. The colder it is, the higher it is. And the problem with the cold one, which I don't recommend even using, is your temperature has to be exact. Whatever it says on there, 66 point, whatever. It has to be really perfect, spot on. And the hot temperature is calibrated so you're taking boiling syrup, and you fill your cup, dump the first out, do it again, so you pre-warm the cup, then place your hydrometer carefully, and there will be a slide there that shows you how to read it.
So with the hot test, yeah.
So, how much to make a gallon of syrup? You're even in this room, you know this, the rule of 86. 1% sap, you need 86 gallons of sap to make a syrup. 2%, which is more common in the industry, obviously, is 4%. So you need to evaporate 42 to 43, depends on whose math you're using to make a gallon of syrup. And there it is in picture form. There's a fellow in Indiana that has his ceiling in his sugar house with all those milk jugs. And then one syrup over here. So anybody that comes in gets the image right away. And I know it said Ohio, but it's really Indiana. Okay, and another rule is 1 tap will give you 10 gallons of sap in a season, which at 2% translates to 1 quarter syrup. Back to sap storage, a little more info, a factor for the number of trees and how fast you can boil. Here we're saying 2 to 3 gallons per tree for a 1 or 2 day good run. And that's pretty average in central Wisconsin. I found from conversations in much of the UP and eastern states, their averages are a little less per day, but most of my customers in central Wisconsin will attest to 2 to 3 gallons per tree. Some days sometimes in 1 day, but generally about 2. So a number of trees, how many gallons? What to store it in? Water grade and or food grade material. The one with the big X through is a garbage can. Those are made out of recycled plastic. Don't know what that is. Put your food in there. A lot of people go with larger tanks like this. They're relatively inexpensive, difficult to clean, but cleanable. Stainless is of course preferable. If you've got the dollars, you'll be happy you did it. Remember, if you're using buckets and bags, that is sap storage also. When those of us with tubing, we have no storage. But your buckets and bags are part of your storage system. Make sure the tanks are clean, covered. Good idea to filter the sap going in. You can never filter often enough. Keep it as cool as possible. Sap spoils just like milk spoils. Don't set it out on the counter and walk away. Keep it cool. How do we make it? See, those are containers filling with syrup right off the tree, which many consumers think is what we do. Doesn't work quite that easily. So what do you need to make sap desired? You need some time, you need patience, lots of sense of humor, something to boil with, and a lot of BTUs. You want to process your sap as quickly as possible and to a proper density. Quickly? So it doesn't spoil. Raw sap spoils quickly. The longer you store it and the warmer you store it, the darker the syrup will be and the stronger the flavor.
Do you want strong flavor?
Some people do.
And it can get off flavored as well.
Oh yeah, you can screw it up very easily. That's another reason why it goes quickly. Most people starting out do it in a pan similar to this. We call it flat pan batch process. Nothing wrong with that. But so you can calculate what size pan for your number of taps. A 1 square foot pan will evaporate. Here it says 3/4 to 2 gallons per hour. It's closer to a gallon than 2 gallons. So if your evaporation gallons of water per hour and hours per gallon of syrup. So you can use a chart like that. Tells you how much sap, how fast I'm cooking, what it will take, time-wise. Here's another way to look at it. Different size flat pans, 4 square feet. You're roughly between 4 and 5 gallons per hour with a good amount of BTUs. And this is just more of the same. If you're using, on the left there, a turkey fryer, be very careful. You need one with a lot of BTUs. Most of Walmart are very few BTUs, and it's going to boil very slowly. If you can find one in the 60 to 70,000 BTUs, it'll work much better. The square pan, you can build your own stove somewhere, even using cement blocks, and evaporate your sap. As you get a little bit bigger, small evaporators, you can see this is a used one. 2x6 evaporator generally is rated at 25 gallons of sap per hour, or roughly a half a gallon of syrup. And then you get even bigger. Sky's the limit here. You can do all kinds of things. So, look at your time, look at your number of taps, potential sap, what size cooking unit you need. This is not a bad way to go for a hobby producer. A stove, or arch as we call it, underneath have to be oil fired, but generally they're wood fired. We have wood. And then a series of pans on top rather than one great big. When I started selling equipment, at least one person a year came in with severe burns because people were using pans the size of this table, and that was handed down from their father and grandfather. Some had handles, some didn't. Well, they would slide it off of this wood stove that they had built, and all it would take is one person on one end to slip a little bit, and all that liquid in there would come flying forward. Way better to use small pans in a series of them. Start them all out with sap. As they cook down, you can either pipe them or dump them together. Put raw side in the one you just emptied and get different densities throughout. Keep putting them together until the last one you can actually make finished surface. Here's another method. It looks crude, but he's using propane, and it worked well for this person. This looks even cruder. Again, there's a lot of good things about this. So, the wood goes in down that little hole in the bottom, which is just fine. But the best thing is he has a smokestack to get the smoke away from the sap. If you don't do that, it will actually smoke right into it, and your syrup won't taste like syrup. It will taste like steam.
Joe, how much
Yes.
sap do you want to maintain?
Well, you want to keep the bottom covered, and the lower it is, the faster it evaporates. That's one of the keys. So if you keep that at around an inch, or if you're if you're watching closely, you can go even shallower and drip it in on one end, so your density depth stays the same. You'll evaporate it. Like most people start out with a pan full and then just cook and cook and cook until it goes down. It's a slow method, but you don't have to watch it closely. That answer that? Okay. This is how evaporators work. There's a chart out there at the association booth, and you can pick up the poster. So anyway, we got these fancy little arrows here. Watching the sap come in, it goes down the pipe, comes back on that side of the evaporator, goes forward on that side, through that section, again, and you're done. You have to use a defoamer. Maple sap is very foamy if you're boiling it. Some people just sprinkle water, but it's less effective. Use something that is food grade, plant-based. Don't use all of these things. Not good for you, not good for your customer, not good for your family. Mainly because of allergies that we have to be worried about today. When I was much younger, those weren't even considerations. Today they are. But there are defoamers out there that you can buy that it only takes a drop. The foam just is very simple. Things that you need. Thermometer is a good idea. A hydrometer is absolutely necessary. A barometer isn't a bad idea, because if you check the temperature, the barometer, then you're going to know the boiling point of water. If you got the proper barometer, it helps you where you can be certain. Using a hydrometer, there's a proper way to use one and an improper way. First off, if you can see it, the meniscus there kind of slides up the top of the glass or feeds straight across the liquid. The other key is, as I started saying earlier, preheat your cup, place your hydrometer in carefully, and reach at the top of the liquid. Then what do? Best thing to do is take that hydrometer and place it in water. Just sort of back in the pan. The reason I say that lot of people just put it back in the empty cup and set it aside. The next time they grab it, they do it again, they do it again. Each time you're building up surf on the hydrometer, and it's getting heavier and heavier. And pretty soon you're reading an incorrect density. So if you place your hydrometer in water, when you're going to use it, just take your hand and kind of dry it, only partially drying it, but that'll leave the proper amount of slip for when it goes into your surf. You're going to have a much more accurate test than if it were really dry or leftover surf from the time before. There's a picture there for this. Refractometers are a nice tool, not necessary for a hobbyist, but if you take cold surf, put one drop on, it will tell you exactly where your density is to the 10th of a point. We use it after almost every batch that we process to make sure everything is done properly. But it has to be cold, regardless of what the salesman tells you. Put a warm drop on there, it's not going to be very accurate. The reading will be real fuzzy. But you only need a drop, so that drop can't move quickly. If you don't properly fill your containers, you can get mold and you can get fermentation happening. Generally, that fermentation comes when the surf is put in the container too thin. Didn't reach at 66.5 bricks or 67. You put it in at 65. You thought it was good. Often fermentation happens. Mold usually happens when you put it in the container and it's not hot enough. The old books tells us to put surf in a container at 180 degrees. Not hot enough. It has to be 180 or above. Somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes after it's in the container. That's still a little bit up to debate. Different research is being done on that. Catherine Hopkins out of University of Maine is saying 2 minutes. Well, that container, especially if it's glass, is stealing a lot of heat out of your product in those 2 minutes. So you better be filling it up at 200 degrees. And your jar better be very warm. Because it's going to cool fast. If you don't do that, then you get home.
Is there a certain temperature where you're overcooking the syrup? In which case you ruin it or affect it?
No, because hopefully you're boiling it at this point. The thing is, you're boiling it, filtering it, which cools it, and then you're bottling it. So the key is what you're doing in between to get that temperature back at 200.
Do people warm up their bottles before bottling it?
Yes, absolutely.
I wasn't sure if that was something doing something.
Well, yes. You know, this industry, some do everything.
What temperature do they warm the bottle up? You know?
Well, everybody does it different. In
Yeah.
my operation, we have the room set at a minimum of 80 degrees.
Yeah.
And then when you start turning on the kettles, it gets much warmer.
Yeah.
So that's really the temperature of our container.
You don't put the bottles in the oven to warm them up.
I don't. A lot of people do. And the real issue comes here, not when you're filling quart containers, it's when you're filling those little fancy 50 ml bottles with a plastic cap.
Yeah.
Some studies have shown it's impossible to fill that hot enough to get it properly sealed. Because it's got a plastic cap, so even after you fill it, you can't put it in the oven, you'll melt the cover.
Okay, so pint bottles, see, my wife likes to heat them up, but she says, what temperature do I heat them to? And I'm like, I don't know, I'll ask the guy.
You can't heat them too high. The higher you go, the warmer they are, the safer you're going to be.
So,
How hot do you do yours?
It's like room temperature.
But you want your room pretty warm.
Well, yeah, maybe when I started out, it went 70, 75 degrees.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it's in the 80s.
Okay.
well, when I do mine, then we bottle them, they're hot, and then we put them into a case upside down, and they're all in that case, and they're staying warm.
Yeah, And that doesn't hurt, but it's what's happening in those first 2 minutes is what's critical. The other thing I would say about that is it's very important to put them on their side, so you're sterilizing the cap and the headspace, but then you probably want to turn them up. Sometimes what happens when you leave them upside down, depending on the cover, you can get foam developing because of little air pockets in the cover. So
I would say turn them up lightweight after how long?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Other thing with putting it in a case like that when it's hot, yeah, you get what's called stack. Yeah, darken. So
You want to cool them down fast. Absolutely right. Okay, but if you cook it too long and it gets too heavy on the hydrometer, this is what happens. And your customers will call you and say, "Why is there glass in the bottom of my bottle?" It's really crystallized maple syrup. And it tastes really good, but it's a bugger to get out of the glass with a little bitty top like that. So don't go thicker. And that's one of the tricks of making maple, getting the proper density. It's an art. It isn't just a science. Cool. Filtering. More is better. Filter many times through the process. You should filter your sap. If you're gathering it the old-fashioned way, make sure it goes through a screen to get out sticks, bugs, and dead squirrels. You can go through cone-shaped filters, inline water filter, washable sock doesn't mean one of those will off your foot. And there are diatomaceous earth filters. Not too many people use them, but they're very effective. Here's some ideas for cloth filters. Either for sap, I would recommend the lightweight poly filter or the flannel filter. I wouldn't do the Orlon heavy filter there. It's just too time consuming. And this is more the same. These are commercial tanks that are available to hang cone-shaped filters in, filtering that way. This is a medium-sized filter press. It's by far the way to filter because it's quick and you don't end up pulling your hair out trying to filter your syrup. You don't lose as much temperature either. A small one, this is 7-inch. These are a little more expensive. The 5-inch are now right around $900, and they're going to filter, depending on how dirty your syrup is, but 5 to 8 gallons at a time. You can always filter this. Packaging. You can also hurt your flavor here. Commercial bottling units, pricey little buggers. Most smaller producers use, like on the left, that's a 5-gallon cone or cylinder. Some people buy large coffee urns. Don't use it for coffee and maple syrup, please. Just syrup. What's nice about them is they have a heating unit to help keep your temperature up while you're bottling. The problem is you don't know what temperature that is until you buy it and experiment. Some of them don't keep it all that warm. It's like 160 instead of closer to 200. If you're going to store your syrup, you should taste each and every batch before you're bottling it. Make sure it hasn't changed in flavor. Package here, it's saying 180 to 190, and I'm telling you, now let's try to get closer to 200. The molds are getting stronger in our environment. The bacteria are getting stronger, so hotter is better. Preferable to use unused containers. If you are using used glass containers, hopefully they have syrup in them before and sanitize them in between. And be sure they're sealed. Talk about turning it outside, refrigerator once open. And please don't reuse containers because one, that one wasn't made for anything hot, and two, it's gonna really change your product. There's some other examples. That one's really disgusting, but I've seen that often in the maple world. Just about out. There was a little section here on marketing. I'm going to have to skip it. And I also skipped over grading. There's a few slides there that aren't sure why. And it has to do with cost, because that's part of this presentation. If you're using sap bags and PVC holders, you're going to have about $2 in that PVC holder, 40 or 50 cents in the bag, and 10 cents in the zip tie that goes around. And then your spout will be anywhere from 15 cents to $2. That's what your system will cost. If you use a metal holder, they're priced roughly $3.60 to $4 right now. Same for the bag, it's going to be 40 cents, and your spout will be 15 cents to $2. Should you?
How many seasons can you get out of a bag?
Preferably one.
Oh, yeah.
Occasionally, people try to wash this snotty, nasty, slimy bag. You'll only do that once. And I say it's not worth it.
I can attest to that. I thought, I'm throwing away this plastic every year. I hate throwing that stuff away. So for 2 years, I tried washing the bags out, and then I rehung them. And then I noticed that maybe 20% of the bags were leaking. So
Yeah, I was gonna say stretching and
they just start getting leaks in them.
Right.
And I was able to wash them okay, and I hung them out on the line. It worked fine, but they start leaking.
It's a nasty
yeah,
job.
I had a question too. So like the defoamer part, you actually pour that into the sap while it's boiling?
Yes, when you see it coming up, it's going to go over the top of the pan. But if you have a good defoamer, it only takes one drop.
Do you use it however much you need it it's not like a rocket science thing. It's not gonna affect the syrup per se as long as you're not dumping the whole thing in there.
Right, and as long as you're using a quality approved defoamer.
Right, okay.
I got to add something else there. I'm sorry, but
That's all right.
I just started using a powder defoamer. I had the liquid before, but that spoils after a year or two. So the powder works just fine, but I think it'll keep longer.
Okay, sure.
Yep.
Interesting.
Right. Okay, back to cost. Yep. Tubing. My experience has been a few years ago setting up a good tubing 5/16 system, not counting pumps or tanks. Contrary to what larger equipment dealers were saying, it was costing about $15 a tank. Costs have gone up, especially in this past year. So if you set up a good system, figure it'll be $15 to $20 plus tanks, plus 3/16 tubing is considerably more cheaper, and you can put a lot more taps on a line which means much less maintenance. So you will be at least 25% less, probably more. So more and more people are putting in 3/16 tubing with, if they've got some slope. If you have good slope, like say 10%, you can put in 3/16 and you will get back, it will develop it right in those lines. If you have less slope, you can put a vacuum pump on it and make it work because your pump is pulling and the tree is also sapping lines. And it's a cheaper system. We call it a hybrid system. What number you should put on those lines so far, most research is saying about 20 taps on a line, whereas 5/16 tubing, you really almost always requires vacuum. And some companies are saying 3 on the line, most are going 5. You need a lot more equipment. I slide in there on supplies, but I can't vision it well enough